Everybody. Super excited to have Mark Grover from Stemma AI. He's the CEO of Stemma, and he's also the co-creator of Amundsen, uh, which which we'll talk about. The adventure I had in trying to get information about Amundsen, but really excited to have you on with us, Mark.
Oh, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
So, so Mark, I realize that we're covering kind of two topics here, Amundsen and Stemma, but one of the first questions I typically will ask about is what does the world without, say, an Amundsen or a Stemma look like? What's the pain that customers feel that drives them to calling and or downloading and moving forward?
Yeah. So the summary of that pain is that there is a lot of data within organizations today, and users who want to use data don't know what is out there, what is trustworthy, how do I use it, who else is using it, all these questions. And these questions I learned from my experience working at Lyft and with other companies take anywhere from 25 to 30% of a data user's work away, right? That's the place where they spend time. And that is the problem. So the feeling this invokes is I just joined the company. I'm a data scientist. I know how to create a model, but I don't know what is the context of the data here. Oh, I noticed this particular field seems relevant, but there's 180 of those fields in my warehouse. Which one do I use? And so you have this problem if you have a ton of questions on Slack asking you, what is the source of this information? What does this mean? How do I use it? Has someone else done this before? If you have that, which almost every data-driven decision-making company has it, you have this problem. And I can give you some examples of founding story that kind of made me concretely realize this was such an acute problem that wasn't being solved. But that's the sort of most high-level description.
So it's really it's really identifying what the data is for people, making it discoverable on what the data represents. So that, like, if someone was new, like you said, they walk into the organization, there's something for them to hold on to and say, oh, this looks like this is either the most used or this is the context of this data that I'm looking at.
Exactly, yeah. And you can think of it like Google search for data. What was the web before Google and what was the web after Google? And that's exactly the problem we're talking about here, and just in the context of data that the company has.
Yeah, and in most organizations, they're just thrown into the pit, right? Like, go look for it, find it.
Yeah, and then you look for it, you find it, you do a bunch of work with it, and somebody says, "Oh, wait, you don't want to use that data set. There's some issues with that data. You might look at this other one over here, and
why did you use that field?
And you spend so much time with that piece. It's
yeah. And the later, Rich, the thing you said, the later that problem shows up, the worse the impact is, right? Imagine reporting a metric to the street based on wrong data, right? That just gets worse and worse. And that's why you had to nip this problem in the bud.
And are there situations where that nobody in the organization knows where it is? Like a consultant built it, but they don't even know. They're having to just start from green.
Yeah, totally. I think there are three things that exacerbate this problem, make it more acute. One is the rate of change of data in the organization. So if you acquired a new company or broke down a silo that exists in the past company, right? Or you launched a new division like bikes and scooters happened at Lyft, which generated new data, right? You had to onboard a whole bunch of new people to this new data. That stuff is like one area that compounds it. The second one is the amount of change of people, which are a lot of people joining the company, a lot of people leaving the company, right? And the example you gave the consultant is an example of the latter, right? Someone comes, does something, and leaves. Yeah. And the third one is not just new data. The third one is change in data. So you may have data coming, all your sales dashboards are powered by data from your CRM, but you moved your CRM from being HubSpot to being Salesforce. And that means the entire chain of data that generates the sales dashboard needs to change. And how many of those changes are happening in an evolving organization determines the acuteness of the problem.
So even just the agility of an application itself is often contingent on it, the identification of the data.
Mhm.
So I love a startup story. I'm really a sucker for them. I love the details. So I want to know that. So let's talk a little bit about the very early stages of this. How did let's start with the Amundsen part, and then we'll go into Stemma. How did the very early stages of this come about? And was it just you and a bunch of buddies in a garage somewhere? How did that play out? And walk us through some of the decisions along the way as you grew out of Amundsen and then later Stemma.
Yeah. My story is perhaps a little atypical. I was at a cushy full-time job working for Lyft.
Okay.
And the way I got to Lyft was I used to work at Cloudera for about 5 years on Spark as a software engineer. And I had been at Cloudera 5 years and done a lot of great work. And most of this work was with organizations that were rather large, going through massive change in their data warehousing from something like Netezza or Teradata to something like Hadoop and Impala and things of that sort. And I wanted to work for an organization more deeply and make change in data happen there. So I joined Lyft. I also joined in a slightly different role. I joined as a product manager. I was interested in seeing how I can leverage other skills and sort of influence more than just the code I was writing. I remember my first, and so I joined with no idea of what exactly I was going to do at Lyft, except I was going to help Lyft with their data needs. And I remember my first interview with a data scientist who worked on the ETA team. ETA is the time a driver takes to pick you up when you request your ride.
Right.
And I asked them, hey, how's it going? What's working well and what's not working well? And the very first thing they say is I have a new model for ETAs that I've generated, but I need to compare it with the existing ETAs that are being shown in the app to our users. And I don't know where that data is. And because of that, I can't compare how good or bad my model is, and I can't deploy it. And I was like, surely you must be kidding, right? Of the 2,000 people in the company, if there's one person who knows where the current ETA data is, that's got to be you. If you don't know, then who knows? Right?
Nobody knows.
Yeah. And so he was like, open your app. And so I opened my app, and you've taken Lyft and Uber rides before. You open your app and be like, hey, Jared, your driver is 2 minutes away. Then you say, I'm going to Oakland, California. And they're like, aha, your driver is 4 minutes away. Then you say, I'm going to take a line ride instead of a regular ride. And your driver is 8 minutes away. And then your driver eventually shows up 10 minutes later, right? So in that same session, I have only requested one ride, one individual. I've measured ETA 4 times. And in the app, usually you have ETAs that are being shown to the user, and you have shadow models that run on the side that are just logging data, right? And so we had 20 models that used to work in the past that no longer are in production. So all of that data has been logged in the warehouse. Long story short, Lyft's data warehouse had over 200 columns that had ETA in their name, right? This person had joined 3 months ago, and of course they had no idea what the source of information for the current ETAs was, right? And that's where I realized that there was this problem. It was so big that there needed to be a solution for this. And that I'll just stop here. Obviously, we'll go through the solution journey as well, but to say where you want to take it.
So when you found, I want to open that up though. When you found out about the problem, did you kind of gather a team around it and start building that, or was it just more discovery of that problem is legit?
Yeah, it was just I realized the problem existed, and then I did 2 things. I did one is I went to other companies that were growing really fast to figure out if they had the same problem and how were they solving it. Second one was I did a little bit of industry research to see if there were other solutions out there that existed that solved that problem. And both of them led to some interesting results, right? So I talked to companies like Airbnb, Netflix. I was in the Bay Area at that time,
Yeah,
so and other fast-growing organizations and Facebook, and each of them had exactly the same problem. And they had all tried to build some sort of clunky custom tool internally that tried to solve that problem. I looked at two solutions that were pretty promising from their websites. One was called Elation, and the other with an A, and the other one was called Colibra. That were data catalog solutions, data governance solutions, and they were, claiming to solve this problem. So I took demo of those products and so on and so forth. And what stood out to me was every product that you bring into the organization brings a philosophy along with it, right? There's a particular way of you building a team around it or you operating as a company around it. And it was very clear to me, having seen demos of those products, and that the philosophy that they brought along with them was so incongruent with the philosophy at Lyft, right? And so what was their philosophy? Elation and Colibra are top-down products that rely on a central data stewardship organization, and that can be a full-time job for somebody or a part-time volunteer responsibility for somebody, to go document all the data by hand. So somebody, in my problem, I would have to get either a volunteer, which was, by the way, never going to happen at Lyft. Everybody's so busy scaling what they're doing, or hire 50 data stewards to go document each area of the business and say, this particular column is the source of truth for ETA. This particular column is the source of truth for finance, and so on and so forth. And it would take me 50 people in 2 years in order to actually get this done. And the worst part of it all, Lyft was evolving so fast that the next day it would be out of date. Right? So I just felt like the status quo way of solving solutions was just incongruent with how Lyft operated.
Because the speed at which the data was changing couldn't. So what was the way of getting around that? Because it obviously is a challenge, right? I mean, it's a moving target. And new projects come up quickly. So what was your way of getting around that at the beginning?
Yeah. So the way around, the core thesis of the solution is that how can you get information like Google PageRank from existing systems, so you rely less and less on curation as a way of finding out what's trustworthy.
So is it like a query, seeing how many queries hit it, that type of thing?
Yeah. Okay. How many queries hit it? Who ran it? How far is that person from your team hierarchy? When was it last updated? How many dashboards are powered by it? How many views are those dashboards getting, right? You take this index of the world, and then you power a search and a ranking algorithm based on it. And then I can never guarantee you off these 200 columns, this is a source of truth through automation alone.
Right,
but I can tell you off these 200 columns related
this is what people are using.
Yeah, these are the 20 that you should focus on, because the other 180 are like bogus.
You said something interesting that I think is an interesting thought is, what's the adjacency of the people that used it to your team?
Yeah.
So how's that? That's actually interesting to me, because something might be used a lot, but whether it's actually connected with what your team uses, how are you overlaying that? What was the mechanism there?
Yeah, I mean, so first thing, the reason that's important is because the problem we're solving is that of trust. Can I trust this thing to do my work? Right?
Yeah.
Trust is often done by proxy in human life. If Jared vouches for somebody, I'm like, I trust Jared. Jared vouches for them. I'll trust them, right? That is exactly the way this works around data too, whether we realize it or not. Like, I'm more likely to trust my own teammate from data science ETA team than I'm likely to trust an operations analyst who joined in some other group 3 months ago, right? And so the fact that I can show you who are the people who query this data the most often and show you their names helps you figure out, can you use that person's information as trust for proxy?
So when you first kind of started building this, did you end up implementing it at Lyft as sort of your incubator?
Yeah, I was paid by Lyft. I'm solving problems for Lyft, so I'm solving it for Lyft, right?
Right.
In fact, I try to I get this prioritized within the company, right? I need a team of engineers, and I'm like
Yeah.
a relatively new hire at Lyft. I am maybe 3 months in, right? And I go, I need like 5 people, and I need to do this thing, and they're like, "Yeah, you crazy?" Like, like we have other areas to scope, right? And the good news at that time was Lyft was doing quarterly planning, so all you had to do is you like. If you're like me, you're a little bullhead,
Submit your
right? You
proposal.
go
Yeah.
like, you go knock on the door again in a quarter. And I was very persistent, like, and I had data, I had very clear user
Right.
interviews that showed how acute this problem was. And I was like, we need to take a stab at this. There's nothing else that solves this. Like, this is hurting us real bad. And like, data users, data analysts, data scientists are really hard to hire. And we can like get them like a quarter productive really easily with this. Like, we need to do
Now,
something about it.
did you already have sort of a there's this term, I forget the term. It's a great term though. It comes from evolutionary biology, and it talks about the chasm, like the chasm between, can something evolve from here to here, right? And in technical terms, I like to speak to it in terms of like, can you demonstrate your ability to solve this problem? Can you show that the chasm is traversable? In other words, so when you presented it, did you already have in your head, or maybe with some team members, did you already have in your head how you would solve it? Or was it more like, I know we need to solve this problem. I know that other solutions aren't solving it the way I need it. Um, and I know how we could solve it. It was that you knew, or you didn't know yet quite for sure.
We knew. In fact, one of the things we did in the quarter that we didn't get prioritized was to put together a hack week with
Okay.
3 engineers board for 2 weeks and put together like a really crappy version of this thing. And I think that played a huge role in kind of showing like we had our heads screwed on right, and we kind of knew what we were doing, and it was a matter of just getting the people to like do this thing, right?
And is that where some of your friends that started it, is that where Tao, for example, came from,
Yeah,
and Dimitri?
correct.
And
Yeah,
okay.
Tao joined later than I did, and I don't. Yeah, so like all those people were involved in the project, obviously got involved as the project evolved the company.
So once you got through those that initial thing, and they gave you approval, how big was the team that you ended up bringing on?
Yeah, I think it was 4 or 5 people max.
Mhm.
Like, we got an external design contractor because the reason is like this tool has to be very intuitive to use. So like it was pretty important for it to be intuitive design.
Well, speak to that for just a second, because the
Yeah,
goal was to do it as as automated as possible.
yeah,
How did you bridge that with, okay, now we need a GUI on it, and
yeah.
what was the GUI doing?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, how do people there's like 2 big parts to it, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
the how do people can get this information and use it, and the other one is what information do I need to do in order to serve this trustworthy data information to the consumers, right? And you can think of it very similar to Google, right? Like, Google's got a very simple UI.
Yeah.
It's got a search results page where it shows you all the results. The big difference is if you click on Google for the search results page, it takes you to a website that Google doesn't own, right? But in
Gotcha.
our
Yeah.
case, if you click on a search result, it actually takes you to a page that we own, and it has even more information about data. Because you know what, data scientists, they're like, don't give me some random score of trust. Like, this is one of the things we did later. We're like, oh, what if I told you this thing was 95% trustworthy? They're like, I don't trust you telling me what's trustworthy. Because a data scientist actually, like, depending on where they're working on, may use different metrics in their head. If I'm working on a new area, I discount usage because the data has been around, but I use proxy quite heavily. If I'm working on a core area of the company, I care a ton about usage, then I care about like who's using it, right? And so they were like, show me all the raw information, and I'll decide for myself based on who's using
Whether
it,
it's trustworthy.
Yeah, whether it's trustworthy for the
So it's
use
more
case.
statistical, like based on these stats. Well, here's the stats. We're not going to score it for you, but here's the stats of what we're seeing.
Yeah. So if we are showing all this information, it has to be organized. It has to be intuitive. It has to power the right experience. Also, man, like, listen, I am not the end of that journey. I'm just the beginning of the data use journey, right?
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
helping you figure out what you want to do, and then I got to take you to wherever you want to go. Sometimes it's
Right.
like Looker, right? And sometimes it's like go use BigQuery UI for exploring further. And so like we had to be very thoughtful about, okay, I figured out this one I want to use, and then let me just continue with my flow. And here's a button that takes you to the next step in the flow, right? And so that's why it was very important to be like super thoughtful about this.
So one of the questions, because of this space of catalogs, one of the challenges is that there's so many endpoints for data, right? And the consumption layer is, I mean, clients would love to have every consumption layer also included in the catalog. So are you focused more on the database itself and what's connecting to the database? Or do you kind of start going into the BI layer as well and identifying maybe reports that are being used a lot?
Yeah. So today for Stemma, we will continue with the Amundsen journey, and then I'll talk about the Stemma journey. But like today in Stemma, we integrate with the data warehouse layer, the BI layer, the orchestration layer, and the collaboration layer. So Snowflake, BigQuery in your warehouse layer, Tableau, Looker, things like that in mode in your BI layer. Transformation layer includes Airflow, Prefect, things of that sort, as well as dbt. And the collaboration layer includes Slack and Jira, because like people are talking about that stuff, or there are issues around data sets around there. We want them to be linked and surfaced. So those are the four things we care. But even within those four categories, man, like probably there are 100 data warehouses. I don't even know, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very important that if you're providing a deep, like these integrations end up being very deep instead of being very broad, right? Take an example like Segment. You got to have a very broad integration so you can move data. But for us, we have to go very deep in each of the integrations. So like Stemma, for example, only focuses on the modern data stack. If you use an old school data warehouse, like we don't really connect with that, or we don't really provide deep integration with that. And that's like at the core of like how you can provide this experience, because you have to be very well positioned to provide it only for a certain kind of stack and a certain kind of company. And
so let's talk to that timeline for a second. So let's finish the Amundsen discussion on where it went evolutionarily, and how and releasing it, right? Because still it's just a Lyft project right now.
Correct.
So how did you go from Lyft project to Amundsen?
Yeah. So the project was always called Amundsen, even at Lyft.
Oh, okay.
And we launched Amundsen within 3 months of starting it, which was around mid 2018. And the project was an overnight success. Like the head of analytics, George Singh at Lyft, said, "This is God's work." We had 250 users using it every week, and we just had we used to have an on-call for a data analyst supporting questions on Slack, and that person was like, in the first week of launch, I could answer half my questions that were asked on call just by pointing people. Remember that website, like Let Me Google That For You, doing that, right? And it was just so clear that this thing was the flag bearer of data use, right?
That's cool.
Fast forward, I left Lyft late 2020. Fast forward 2 years. Amundsen is the biggest CSAT scoring tool within Lyft. Amundsen, it has 750 users every week, and it's just like a core part of day in, day out of any data user at Lyft.
Wow, I mean that's awesome. So and out of curiosity, how this is more a question about Lyft. Like, does Lyft not consider this like this is our personal IP? I mean, how is it that they like release this out into the world for free? I mean, I guess it's thank you, but like what?
Yeah. I mean, so Lyft, the data community is very open source minded, right? So like we all used open source software. Lyft was very big into open source. It used things like Presto, which they've talked about publicly. Used things like Apache Superset, which they've also talked about publicly. So it's very it's a very data community thing to actually use open source software and contribute back. And that was a part of the rationale. Also,
so when you first started Amundsen, did it immediately start as, hey, we're going to create an open source project right out of the gate?
No, it was started as Lyft's project.
Okay.
What happened is I wrote a blog post, which you may find online, which is describing the problem and the solution we built and how, the impact it's had. And ING saw that blog post and they were like, "Ooh, Drew, I want that." Right, the bank.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they were like, "I want that." And so they reached out, and they already knew there were big parts of the Airflow community,
right?
And they were talking to Lyft about some Airflow stuff, and they reached out at the same time, like, "Oh, like we saw the Amundsen post, we want to talk to the Amundsen folks." And we chatted, and they were like, "We want to use it. Well, how can we use it?" And we said, "Okay, well, let's just the code was fairly modular to the credit of the team, and so we opened it up, and we were like, if we're going to open it up to ING, might as well just why does it have to be ING, right? So it can just be open for everybody, and then we'll create a Slack channel for us for collaboration with ING, but anyone can join, right?"
Yeah.
And that's where people started joining. So Amundsen community today is over 2,000 people.
Wow.
It's used by 35 plus companies. And that community was, that was the community.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the folks that are using it, I mean, they're big companies. These are not small organizations.
Yeah.
So the problem it doesn't, if you're a small organization, maybe you have one tool or two tools. But when you've got complexity is where it becomes even more relevant.
Yeah. So take me to Stemma. How did you go from that? So people start joining the Amundsen project.
Yeah.
And then tell me about how you kind of came to Stemma.
Yeah. So the thing about using Amundsen open source is that it takes a firepower from the organization in terms of engineering bandwidth in order to support this project. Also, every organization is different, and their needs, the level of automation we wanted to deliver, we had really great automation with certain parts of the stack that Lyft used, but not as great of an automation with other parts of the stack that were maybe more widely used, even though they weren't used at Lyft. Example, Lyft never used Snowflake, right? So Snowflake is used everywhere outside of Lyft.
Yeah.
And two things stuck to me was, one, that there were a lot of companies joining over and over again using this. So it was good validation for me that this problem was real, even though I had seen it only one company. Now I knew that there were a bajillion companies that had the same problem, had a desire to solve that problem. And the second one was how, no disrespect to the open source project, but how unserving the open source project was to these larger proportion of companies that didn't have the people to put on the project to deploy it, right?
Well, and that kind of speaks to my challenge in even getting this interview. And it wasn't you. It was I was reaching out to the project going, who can speak to Amundsen? I want, give me a spokesperson for Amundsen. And so I actually went to find who was the highest contributor. That's how I came up across Tao and Dimitri. And I'm reaching out to them, and I, they're busy doing their projects at their own company, and it's an added thing. But, finally they reply to me, and it's like, yeah, no, I don't do interviews like this. So, and then pass it on to somebody else. And it wasn't until I finally got in contact with you, it was like, yes, so someone can speak to this now.
Yeah. And so the thing that was important to me was I felt very energized by the problem. I felt like this was a problem that was very, very important for organizations. I felt I could work on this problem for 10 years and not get bored. And I felt like the current way of me solving this problem, which was being at Lyft and supporting an open source project on the side in my evenings and weekends while I worked on other stuff in Lyft, wasn't the most impactful way of solving that problem. And the most obvious way for me to solve that was to actually go build Stemma. And so Stemma is a data catalog inspired by Amundsen. It is on the cloud, but it has a whole bunch of additions on top. So you think Amundsen is automated, Stemma is even further automated, right? And I can go into details there, but there are 4 things we focus on in Stemma. The first one is time to value. How can I lower the time by which you can start using it and getting value out of it in day one. The second one is ensuring for adoption. This like is what it sounds like, making sure that you get great penetration similar to what you got at Lyft. We got that Lyft in every single customer that we have. Third one is embedding in existing user workflows. And the idea is, how can I enrich existing places where you hang out, whether that's Tableau or Slack, instead of forcing you to always come to Stemma in order to get the value.
Yeah.
The fourth one is security. All organizations are very focused on security, so it's very important that we have like the sort of standard compliance needs, but we have actually deployment models that have that are SaaS but are deployed on premise, so it gives the best of both worlds to the organization. And so those are the 4 areas we focus a lot on.
Now, when you started it, similar vein, was it a garage project and you just pulled some of the guys that you knew? How did you decide to create that first nucleus team for Stemma?
Yeah, the first nucleus was my co-founder.
Yeah.
I had known Dorian for a bit back then, and he and I had started scheming about this. This was early days of pandemic, I think, we were both super excited. We had seen the impact it can have, and that was the start. So it was only Dorian and I who started, and we were confident that we would find people to join and the right mindset, and we did. But it was just the 2 of us who kind of got it going.
So between Amundsen and Stemma, have there been any moments where you really knew you had something special? You mentioned the one where he said, "This is God's work." Are there any others like that you've experienced as you've been doing demos or showing clients?
Yeah, there have been plenty. Let me see which are the noteworthy ones.
I think it's probably kind of hard to top. This is God's work, but
yeah. The other thing that sort of dawns on me is, someone maybe in another year or 2 will look back at this crazy period, the number of lives lost and families touched with the COVID epidemic, and then hopefully balance it a little bit with the positive stories of people and things that were done during this crazy pandemic times, startups that have been created, and the impact on lives. Doing God's work is a big deal. So that's the other side of the story. Medicine that's been invented and other things that have been created. But really, as you look to your when you sit down and somebody clicks on see a demo on your website, and you sort of go through this epiphany curve of the world of the possible, what are some of the top things that people recognize immediately as the things that they need in their organization?
Yeah, so the 2 use cases that people have in their mind, I'll start with the second one first because we've been talking about the first one quite a lot. The first one is data discovery, which is like, I'm a user, I want to find out what data is trustworthy for me to use. We've chatted a bunch around that. The second use case is around impact analysis. So I own a particular piece of data. I'm going to change it in some way. I'm going to deprecate this data, or I'm going to evolve the type of the data from one type to another. And I need to understand like who's using it and communicate, maybe even hold them accountable to make their downstream changes first and be ready for my change when I'm about to do it, right? And right now, the way to lead these changes is to send this big spam message on Slack, right? And who reads those? You can't hold anybody accountable for that, right? And the person who usually does this is a data engineer, and she may be like, so like, it's one of the most frustrating jobs in data right now. Why? Because she has to deal with all the changes that she had to make sure that like the data is being delivered valuably, accurately every day. She has to deal with all these questions that people ask on Slack about like, hey, is it on time? What does this mean? Can I still use it? Is this better than that? All this other stuff. And the third one is that she needs to make changes to data, and she needs to hold her users accountable to changing the dashboards that they own, because I am deprecating this thing and you got to change all this other stuff, right? And it's just really frustrating for them. And the core of this is them understanding who uses my data and telling them very targetedly, like, you have used my data in the last 30 days. this is how you used it. I know it. You need to modify this from this query to that query, because starting May 31st, this thing is going to change. And Stemma provides that ability to the data engineer, because we just had all that visibility for the discovery use case. And it was just a different lens for providing that information for the lineage use case. So we find data engineers get really excited who produce data about the ability to see who's using their data, how it's being used, and who do they need to inform about changes.
Let me ask you a quick question on the counters, sort of the crawlers, that for lack of a better term.
That's a good term.
So are you connected to the database in a way? Like what's the mechanism that's doing those counts? How are you counting that?
Yeah, we call them crawlers, just like you did.
Okay.
And they get information about what data is present in the database. That is a pretty standard way of storing that information. It's called information schema. The second thing that's not as standard is we get the query logs from the database. Okay. So we are able to see who ran the query, when, what kind of query it was, and so on and so forth. And those two pieces form the core thesis of our infrastructure.
Gotcha.
When you get into the BI tools, so think of Looker as an example, where you've got a LookML model. So you've got some metadata that sits between the data and the reports. Are you doing analysis of the metadata as well, or are you just looking at sort of the queries that fired against the database?
No, the reports as well. So how many people viewed the report? What tables is the report touching? Who is viewing the report? When was the report last updated? Things of that sort are also a part of the crawler. But that one is hitting the BI tools APIs.
Interesting. So one of the things that often this cataloging industry gets asked about, I'm curious if you guys cover this, because it's not exactly required in cataloging, but people sort of infer that it might be there, which is this lineage path, because you've got a report that's supplied by a data warehouse, which is supplied by a data lake, which is supplied by an ETL tool, which is supplied by a source application. And there's reasons that you want that information, obviously, for audit and whatnot. Do you get into that world, or is it because it is a very challenging world to get into, because you're having to trace metadata and whatnot. Is that part of your world?
Yeah. So lineage is definitely a part of the world, but I think lineage data can be used for a variety of different use cases, and how you interact with that data would differ depending on your use case. So we focus a lot on operational use cases. So impact analysis is our use case on top of lineage. But some of the use cases you were describing that will focus on the future would be things like auditing. Like someone noteworthy in the company did something, and I want to see what exactly they did, right? I know that this particular data set is sensitive because it has personal information, and I want to use lineage to tag all the downstream data sets to be sensitive as well, because they all derive from it, things of that sort. So these are use cases we will work on in the future, but today we are very focused on that operational data engineering use case of impact analysis, which is powered by lineage.
Gotcha. So I want to draw kind of a line of where Stemma starts and where Amundsen ends, right? And we've talked about it a little bit, but is it fair to say that Amundsen really focuses on the databases themselves, and crawling those? Does it cover a little more scope than that, or does it just stay within the database world?
No, it has integrations with BI tools as well, limited. The way I would divide would be not based on integrations, but would be based on time to value.
Okay.
Right? And so the integrations are limited, but the time to value with Amundsen to both stand it up, but then we have added other automation. For example, one was to say that last updated automated lineage. So Amundsen can't compute automatically lineage for you, but Stemma can. So each of the use cases you can do with Amundsen, but you have to write a lot of machinery yourself, which reduces time to value. For lineage, it would be parsing out the queries. For Looker, it's writing your whole new integration and parsing out Looker API and LookML, like Katie was mentioning. And so like for different areas, the layer is different, but the whole thing is like, how can you just like click a button and have Stemma show up? There's no cold start problem, by the way, because Stemma doesn't use data from Stemma. Stemma uses data from other systems which already exist before Stemma.
Right.
And on day one, you're just getting value, right? While to set up something like Amundsen, even with the limited scope, takes months and multiple engineers for you to just get that up, even with the limited.
Now, is there a place? Well, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. Mark, let's talk a little bit about that. So if I would like tomorrow to stand up Stemma, you mentioned on-prem, cloud. There is obviously instrumentation, the portal through which I see the assets that are available that I could do the search on, just like I go to google.com.
Yep.
What's the typical model for deployment? Are you deploying agents and doing the crawling on-prem and then bringing up into the cloud? Talk a little bit at a high level. What does the architecture typically look like for a deployment?
Yeah, the architecture usually looks like there's a choice of whether you deploy that on hosted deployment or on the customer's VPC. In either case, you have managed offerings, so the experience of managing is owned by Stemma, not by the customer. And once it gets deployed, there are service accounts that the customer creates on databases, on Looker, that Stemma uses that get put into Stemma's admin panel, and Stemma uses them to pull that information, crawl, aggregate, and recommend based on it. Is that what you were asking for?
Yeah, that's perfect. And so you will generate essentially the metadata repository, a graph, if you will, of all of those assets so that they become searchable and accessible through a portal that the customer would log into.
Correct. In fact, it's funny that you mentioned graph. First version of Stemma used a graph database under the back.
Okay, cool. And is this, are you seeing that this is, either disrupting competitors in the space, or, are you going into accounts where people are like, is there disruption yet, or is the market still green enough that it's basically, the greenfield?
Yeah. I think there's like, it's green enough. The reason is data catalogs of Pastillation and Calibra haven't gotten widespread penetration just because they require a lot of curation, right?
Right.
And so what we're finding is a lot of modern companies, iRobot, Convoy, Coughlin, e-commerce in Germany, or like these have modern data stacks, like you got Athena and Snowflake, and they have Tableau and Mode and Looker, and they are like hurting from this problem real bad. And they don't buy into the idea of hiring data stewards to document their data, and they're like fully on board with the idea that I want a Google-like search system and an impact analysis system for my organization. So these are the organizations that have never had data catalogs in the past that are buying that today. And if it wasn't for a modern data catalog for their modern data stack, they won't be buying one, because the experience of the previous generation requires a lot of curation, which these high growth companies can't afford.
Is there a place for commentary in it though? Like, is it all just fully automated, or is there a place for people to comment?
So this is a place where we've had some learnings. Initial versions of Amundsen didn't have that, right? Like we were so gung-ho on automation and all this other stuff, and I think that was a mistake. The reason is humans do have tribal knowledge, right? So I'll give you a concrete example. This one I've alluded to earlier, migrating your CRM from HubSpot to Salesforce, you find that automation, just about like, let's say you were a day after the migration, automation would tell you the right sales data to go to is HubSpot, because that's what people have used forever. Right? The reality is last night, some data engineer pulled the plug, and like now the source of information is Salesforce, right? And what you need to do is you need to give intuitive controls around suggesting the automation, which direction to go, if you know something that's different than the automation, right? And so that's a place where Stemma has invested a lot of energy, which we call like human in the loop. How do we bring human in the loop by giving them intuitive controls as they're changing and deprecating? that Stemma leans on to say like, oh, actually the world is different than what we think because someone just made this big change, right? And that's a place where we have spent a lot of energy, both design wise as well as technology wise, to enable.
Interesting. Okay. And okay, so speak to me about features. You've spoken to a lot of features. Are there any features coming out that you're really excited about, or stuff that we haven't heard about yet that you're excited about that have come out?
Yeah. I'll start with one that exists that people really love. We have two that I'll start with the second most loved feature in Stemma. In my past job, I've created ERDs, entity relationship diagrams, that kind of show like how data is connected, and people love them because you can see like, okay, this thing is a key into that thing, and I need to connect those two things together. The pain with ERDs is that they're cumbersome to build, and then they always get out of date, right? And so one of the things that Stemma does, because it has access to query logs, is actually shows you the most common join patterns, the most common usage patterns in the company. And so think of it as like us generating an automated ERD for you, even though it's not like it's not apples to apples in the sense that it's not a visual representation just yet. That's like something we're super excited to do.
Cool.
That is cool. It is like showing you how data is being used. So like, you don't have to rely on an ERD being populated and curated by hand. You can rely on those in order to use the data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how does it even look? How does it display?
We just show you query snippets of the most commonly used in the company. So you may have a 100-line SQL query, but we take out the most common snippets because we can parse those, and we show you like, hey, these are this join condition is like used in 90% of the queries in this table.
That's really cool. Yeah, you should talk with the guys at SQL DBM, do a collaborative thing with them because they have a great GUI and a great setup. Would be a cool collaboration for ERDs and stuff.
Yeah, sounds great. And then the second feature that folks love is our Slack bot. So what happens is that, listen, like you deploy a product, but there's still old habits here, right? Like old habit is I will just go to Slack and use I'll just ping a coworker, or in a non-virtual world, like I'll tap on their shoulder and ask them a question about data, right? And Stemma Slackbot allows these conversations to be linked to the catalog. So you are a previous version of the product, like that we tried, actually try to force conversations in the product, right? And that's what, by the way, Relation Libra do. But the thing is, people already have a best of breed product that use conversations. And instead of pushing people away from it, we have learned to lean into the habit, right? And so how do we create a world-class Slack integration that enables you to ask a question in Slack, but also like keeps Stemma in that loop, right? And so those are the most loved thing from Stemma customers. And maybe looking forward to the other question you asked, which is like, I am super excited about doing things that embed in the user's workflow, right? How can I enhance the experience that a data analyst has in Tableau by enriching it with information that's already in Stemma? Like that is really
that's the gold. Yeah. Long ago, this is a long time ago. I think it was either Business Objects or a Cognos report. We had a consulting engagement where we created a footer in the report. I mean, it was reporting era. Like this is operational reporting. Long time ago, we created a footer in the report that gave a percentage trust score. And the client was just bananas about it. They're like, this is either for the good or the bad. Like we would hear from people saying, well, they're like, how do you know it's bad? And others are like, yeah, we should use this report more often. But it had a lot of power. It wielded a lot of power. So, and I can't even remember how we came up with that number, but somehow we came up with a percentage trust score in the footer. And that's really powerful. So how is it? How is Stemma licensed? How do you go to market with it? Tell us a little bit about
that. Price based on number of users, and prospects come to our website. They see a demo. They contact us. We set it up,
and a user would be a person being able to search the system, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And is it all in the cloud? Are there pieces that are not is every piece in the cloud, or are there like clients or things like that they've got to deploy?
Every piece is in the cloud. It could be theirs or ours, that kind of thing. But
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
or agents or anything like that.
And what is the best way for folks to get their hands on it? Is there a demo copy, or how does that
there's
work?
a demo on the website. Hit us up at stemma.ai. I'm Mark at stemma.ai. If you ever have any questions for me, always happy to hear from you.
That's awesome. And do you typically find that people will do their own sort of in-house thing first and then reach out to you, or are you finding that they're reaching out to you first and then doing these pilots?
They reach out pretty early on. I think like the reason why people reach out is that it's funny that we're talking about this towards the end, but like, let's zoom out the most. Right?
Yeah.
The big trend that's happening is that data consumption and data production are getting decentralized. And so in early 2010s, Tableau and Looker really started gaining steam. And what that meant is a finance manager no longer needs to wait on a data analyst to pull their numbers so they can generate their report. They can generate the report themselves from Tableau, right? So the barrier to entry to consuming data got lowered in early 2010s. Then DBT comes around in late 2010s and says, I'm going to reduce the barrier to entry to producing data. So no longer I need to be a data engineer in order to write an ETL job. I can be a data analyst and generate an ETL job, right? What this means is that both the barriers to entry to consuming and producing data have gone lower and lower significantly in 2010s. And what that means today is that it requires a new way of searching for data, because a lot more people are generating data that is not produced by a central authority, right? And so like that requires a ton more collaboration and insight, which you can't just do in a centralized way in the way that people have done previously. So coming to your question, like the thing that these organizations are trying to do is they're trying to reduce that bottleneck of data team in producing more data, generating more analytics for you on Tableau, and enabling self-serve in the new organization. And Stemma is a part of that change. It's not the whole thing. And so they're trying to enable this big cultural decentralization, self-service change that we support as one piece of that puzzle.
Interesting.
Mark, I agree completely with that observation. I think the driver right now, so we're sort of going through these cycles of self-service, business enablement, being able to do the things that you need to do without IT's involvement. And it's always been a pendulum that swings. If you think about the early BI tools, Business Objects, MicroStrategy, Cognos, it was the idea of self-service. The users will be able to self-serve. Perhaps not necessarily a vision that was realized. And so as we've moved to the cloud, the opportunity to create more and more data is there. So now the question becomes, okay, what do I do with it? Where does it live? And it's no longer one system, two systems. It's prepackaged applications. These analytics are being built. Models are being built. Data science is being driven. I'm sharing this data inside my company, but I'm also sharing it with third parties. And the challenge is we're manufacturing. Jared's got a wonderful video, data as plastic. The challenge is all of this data is out there. I've got data engineers doing work. I've got data scientists doing work. But when you need to connect the dots, you sometimes have, the proverbial thousands of reports, and you don't necessarily know which one to use. Same thing with, if you peel the onion, same thing with the data assets. So you're right. This is an observation at the beginning, and I'm glad we didn't miss it at the end.
Well, awesome, Mark. It's been really great having you on with us. And I wish you the best of luck with this startup. I love startups. I think startups are the coolest part about America is the number of startups we get. So Stemma.ai. What did you say the email was again?
Mark at Stemma.ai.
Okay. You're going to get a lot of spam now. You ready?
His voice, it's not indexed. So hopefully only those who watch. So you have to watch the whole video to get the email address. At least there's an investment to be made.
All right, Mark. Thank you so much. Look forward to connecting with you later.
Likewise.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thanks.